We arrived in Scotland at the Edinburgh airport. After realizing our checked bags were lost, we drove to Dunblane where we stayed 2 nights. Our first outing was to Stirling Castle. The castle occupies a strategically important point between the Scottish lowlands and the Highlands. For this reason, the castle has been described as the brooch which joins the two halves of Scotland. Starting in the 11th century during the reign of Malcolm III of Scotland, Stirling Castle was used as a royal fortress. Later in the 12th century, during the reign of Alexander I of Scotland and his successors, the castle developed into a major royal residence. Some historical highlights include the castle's prominent role during the Wars of Scottish Independence. In 1297, William Wallace led a famous victory against a much larger English army at nearby Stirling Bridge, taking control of the castle. Here in the distance, you can see the National Wallace Monument. Later in 1314, Robert the Bruce's army laid siege to the then English-controlled castle. This led to the Battle of Bannockburn, where the Scots won a resounding victory. During the late 15th century, the castle underwent a major renovation during the reign of James IV and his immediate successors. James IV's Great Hall that you see here was the largest ever built in Scotland. It boasted 5 fireplaces and 4 spiral staircases. In the late 1530s, James V fitted out these royal apartments in the French Renaissance style. These additions became known as the Palace Building. Several Scottish kings and queens were crowned at Stirling Castle, including Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1542. Other monarchs were born, baptized, or died here. We stopped at Glasgow before driving through Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. We would have liked to see this area more if we had time. The drive was really scenic, with many beautiful towns like Inverary seen here. We continued our drive to Kilberry, which is a very sparsely populated town in southern Argyll on the Kintyre Peninsula. We arrived at Kilberry and had a great one-night stay at the Kilberry Inn. Dinner and breakfast were delicious and the staff were very friendly. We also tried some great scotches, including some from nearby Campbelltown. We walked from the inn to the Kilberry sculptured stones. The stones consist of 3 early Christian grave slabs, all incised with crosses, 8 late medieval West Highland grave slabs, 8 late medieval cross fragments, and 7 simpler grave slabs dating from the 1500s and 1600s. Our next destination was the Kinnicraig Ferry. On our way, we made a quick stop here at Tarbert. We drove onto the ferry, which took us to Islay. Besides wanting to visit some of our favorite Scotch distilleries, we also wanted to see the region where some of my ancestors were born.
One of our first stops on Islay was the wool mill, established in 1883. The shop has made fabric for many movie costumes, including Braveheart, Rob Roy, and Warhorse. The shop owners gave us an interesting tour of the shop and the weaving process. We continued our drive to the Port Charlotte Hotel, where we would stay 3 nights. The hotel's bar was the best Scotch bar we've been to, and we spent a great deal of time trying scotches that we would not be able to buy in the US. We went to 3 distillery tours on Islay, starting with Bruichladdich, then to Laphroaig, and finishing at Ardbeg, where we tried some of the most delicious Scotch ever during the special edition tasting session. One of our last outings on Islay was to see the old Kilcullen Church and the beach at Macure Bay. It was a cold, rainy day, so we didn't linger long at the beach. Islay was one of our favorite locations on the trip, and we would have liked to spend more time there. Our next destination was Oban. We reached Oban after a 2.5-hour ferry ride. We would spend the next 3 nights there.
While driving back to the Kennancraig ferry terminal to pick up our bags that United lost, we stopped for a walk and found Carnaserrie Castle. It was built by Bishop John Carswell for his clan chief Archibald Campbell, the 5th Earl of Argyll. The castle was one of the first Renaissance residences in Argyll. Carnaserrie stands at the head of the Kilmartin Glen with access to the sea at Crinan. It was well placed for Curson, custodian of the castle, to promote Protestant Christianity across the Gaelic-speaking Hebrides. Carswell was Campbell's personal chaplain and an important ally in the Earl's efforts to drive the Reformation of 1560. He was the first Protestant bishop of the Isles and supervised the building of the castle. He was also the first to translate John Knox's Book of Common Order into Gaelic. In 1685, Royalists looted the castle after its owner, Duncan Campbell, backed the failed rebellion of the 9th Earl of Argyll. Campbell complained that after all their cruelties and robberies, they did set fire to the said house of Carnaserrie and burn it to ashes. It was never repaired.
Next, we went to see the Nether Largie standing stones. Many theories exist as to the purpose for the hundreds of standing stones in the British Isles. One of the theories is that these specifically were made to mark the movement of celestial bodies. The standing stones align with the midwinter sunrise and the autumn and spring equinox sunsets. 3 of the stones have circular hollows and rings on one side. Here along the coast in Crinan, we saw the westernmost point of the 9-mile-long Crinan Canal. These sailboats were transitioning through the locks into the canal.
We walked to the nearby Glebe Cairn, which archaeologists believe is an ancient burial site of a powerful couple. Several similar cairns are nearby.
The next day, we drove south of Oban to Easdale Island, the smallest permanently inhabited island of the Inner Hebrides. According to family records, some Makikans worked here. We took a short ferry ride on this boat to the island. Once the center of the British slate industry, Easdale had a community of over 500 people. They worked as many as 7 quarries. Easdale slate helped build major cities across the British Empire. The Great Storm of 1850 flooded most of the quarries. Lacking any means to pump the water out, the slate industry on the island practically died. Some minor slate extraction continued intermittently into the 1950s, but now once active quarries are just still pools of water.
Another trip from Oban was Archatten Priory. It was a monastic community founded in 1230 by Duncan MacDougall, Lord of Argyll. Their surviving buildings are the remains of the original church plus later additions. The priory structure, the burial ground, and the carved stones seen here have been designated a Scheduled Ancient Monument by Historic Environment Scotland.
Just north of downtown Oban is Dunollie Castle. In the 12th century, the area around present-day Dunollie became part of the Kingdom of the Isles, ruled by Somerled. After his death, the MacDougalls became Lords of Lorne. Dougal, Somerled's son, held most of Argyll and the nearby islands. In 1308, Robert the Bruce defeated the MacDougalls at the Battle of the Pass of Brander. The MacDougalls' lands of Lorne were subsequently forfeited and given to the Campbells. The existing castle ruins date largely from the 15th century. In 1661, the castle was returned to the MacDougalls. In 1746, the MacDougalls abandoned Dunollie Castle and built Dunollie House just downhill from the castle ruins.
Having to know what a Scottish fish taco would taste like, my final lunch in Oban was at Taco Bay. Surprisingly, it was the best fish taco I've had outside the southwest U.S.
We left Oban to journey up to the Isle of Skye. Along the way, we stopped at Glencoe National Nature Preserve. The Visitor Center has an example of a typical turf and creel house that local Highlanders would have lived in. One of the most well-known historical events of Glencoe was the massacre of 1692. 38 members of Clan MacDonald were killed by Scottish government forces, allegedly for failing to pledge allegiance to the new monarchs, William III and Mary II. Many movies and TV shows have been filmed in Glencoe, including the James Bond movie Skyfall, Harry Potter, Highlander, Rob Roy, Mary Queen of Scots, and Braveheart. The remaining drive to Skye continued offering beautiful views as seen here at Loch Eel.
Just up the road from our hotel was Dunvegan Castle. It was the seat of the chief of Clan MacLeod. The castle was first built in the 13th century and developed piecemeal over the centuries. Between 1840 and 1850, the 25th clan chief oversaw a massive renovation of the whole castle in a mock medieval style. The castle is the only Highland fortress to have been continuously occupied by the same family for 800 years. The fairy flag of the MacLeods seen here has mysterious origins and is said to have magical properties for those who possess it. After leaving the castle, we walked around the beautiful gardens despite the windy, rainy weather. The 5 acres of formal gardens began in the 18th century and consist of a water garden, rose garden, walled garden, and woodland walks.
Skye is well known for its scenic landscapes, so we drove most of the roads. While driving, we passed these Highland cows in a pasture, so turned around to get some pictures. One of the most well-known and scenic destinations on Skye are the fairy pools. Situated at the base of the Black Cuan mountain range, these series of pools form along the River Brittle. Swimming in the cold pools is a somewhat popular tourist activity we saw, but we did the best we could to stay dry on our already cold, rainy day. We left Skye for a long drive to Pitlochry. Our first stop was Eilean Dunvegan Castle. The first version was built in the mid-13th century and was a stronghold of the clan Mackenzie. However, in response to the Mackenzies' involvement in the Jacobite rebellions, government ships destroyed the castle in 1719. The present-day castle is Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae Gilstrap's 20th century reconstruction of the old castle.
We made a quick stop along our drive to see Loch Ness and Urquhart Castle before having dinner in Inverness. Then we saw Culloden Battlefield, which is just east of Inverness. Here was the culmination of the Jacobite uprising of 1745. On April 16, 1746, the Jacobite army of Charles Edward Stuart was decisively defeated by a British government force under Prince William Augustus, Duke of Cumberland. It was the last pitched battle fought on British soil. Efforts were subsequently made to further integrate the Scottish Highlands into the Kingdom of Great Britain, while civil penalties were introduced to undermine the Scottish clan system. The lords and clan chiefs who had supported the Jacobite rebellion were stripped of their estates and the wearing of a tartan was banned.
While staying in Pitlochry, we drove north for a day trip to the Cairngorms National Park. The park covers the Cairngorms mountain range and surrounding hills. It is also Scotland's largest national park. The Cairngorm Mountains provide a unique alpine semi-tundra habitat, which is home to many rare plants, birds, and animals. This includes the only herd of reindeer in the British Isles, which were introduced in 1952.
Along our way to Edinburgh, we made a stop at Falkland Palace. It was first built in the 13th century and owned by the Earls of Fife. Between 1497 and 1541, James IV and James V transformed the old castle into a beautiful Renaissance palace. It was one of Mary, Queen of Scots' favorite places, providing an escape from much turmoil. As real or court tennis players, we were especially interested in the Royal Tennis Court. Built for James V, construction was completed in 1541. It is the oldest tennis court in use and is Scotland's only real tennis club. The first record of a garden here was in 1451. Fruit, vegetables, and herbs were first grown in the area and meat was hunted in the forest surrounding the palace. Over time, the style and purpose of the garden changed to meet the desires of the residents. James VI met with ambassadors here to discuss internal and foreign affairs.
Our final destination in Scotland was back to Edinburgh, where we began. We returned our rental car and explored the city by foot. The Georgian House is an 18th century townhouse in the heart of the historic New Town. It has been restored and furnished by the National Trust for Scotland. Most of the furnishings and fittings in the house date from at the later Georgian period, but some are even older. Standing atop Castle Rock in central Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Castle can be seen throughout much of the city. There has been a royal castle on the rock since at least the reign of David I in the 12th century, and the site continued to be a royal residence until the 17th century. As one of the most important strongholds in Scotland, the castle was involved in many conflicts, from the Wars of Scottish Independence in the 14th century to the Jacobite Rising of 1745. Research identified 26 sieges in its 1100-year history, giving it a claim to having been the most besieged place in Great Britain and one of the most attacked in the world.
As you can see from our route, we covered a lot of ground and tried to make the most of our 17 days in Scotland, despite the 8-day delay in getting our bags. From seeing my ancestors' homeland and constant natural beauty, to frequent Scotch sampling, to daily immersion in rich history, our visit to Scotland was incredible, and we look forward to returning.